Now, the World's Leadership Institute's Professor Noel Ferguson has criticized Labour Party leader Keir Starmer's leadership style, saying that he's more of a manager.
The entirety of the party, I think the public have been fed up now with the Conservative Party, because to give you an example, whenever one of their parliamentarians broke the rules, then Boris Johnson tried to say, well, let's just change the rules so that bad things can be acceptable. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, he has not been in high office, elected high office. And if you recall, a number of years ago, the Labour Prime Minister of the day, Gordon Brown, who was the successor to Tony Blair, he's almost in the same mould as Keir Starmer. They're more managers as opposed to leaders. They're almost like a steady hand on the ship, but they don't inspire confidence to say, hey, we're off into a bright and bold new future. It's kind of predicting that Labour will have 420 seats in the Parliament, and it only needs 326 to have a majority. And that's why it's saying that this will be, in modern day history, the largest landslide in political history in the UK. And if you think back to, was it 1998, whenever Labour almost done the same and had a landslide, this one's going to be even larger, potentially, but yet it's been at the helm of Keir Starmer, who I say is not so much an aspirational leader, he's a manager. So if he actually steps up to the mark, he can do substantially more with that majority than what Tony Blair did in the 90s.
The South African Institute of International Affairs, Stephen Gruzd, joins us now for more analysis on the UK general election 2024. A very good evening to you. Thanks very much for your time. I want to pick up from where I left off with our fellow journalists there a little earlier, where it is being projected that Rishi Sunak is certainly going to lose this election, paving the way for the country's first Labour government in 14 years.
Yes, good evening and thank you for having me. The polls are all suggesting a massive landslide for Labour, with the Conservatives deeply unpopular. Your previous reporter was talking about the sad history of the last few years in trying to get Brexit done, or in fact having the Brexit vote in the first place, which brought down David Cameron, and then Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and now Rishi Sunak. They seem bereft of ideas, and it seems that the British public is really wanting a change. I happen to have been studying in London in 1997, and it was a massive win for Tony Blair in those days. And I get a similar sort of feeling around this election, that it's going to be an enormous change in the composition of Parliament.
Brexit, you say, but then Ipsos, the research and consulting firm that usually, does polls, even in our case, they said that this, election was fought on 5 issues, and in this order: healthcare and the National Health Service, 41%, the economy, 33%, immigration, 30%, inflation, 29%, then housing, 17%. Now, if Brexit was as big, an issue, what would have been the contribution of these 5 issues and in the order that I've just outlined?
Well, look, I think Brexit was such a close vote, but it was a long time ago. It was already 8 years ago, and I think it's been done. It hasn't really been an issue at all in this election. But of those that you mentioned, 4 of them are really directly related to people's lives and the economy. Housing, you mentioned, health, education, and so forth. And so I think social issues, socioeconomic issues are by far dominant. You did mention there the migration question, and that's been an interesting one. We've seen right-wing parties gain in European elections on an anti-immigration ticket, and it's a very controversial issue in the UK before Brexit and after Brexit. But I think the key point is that the issues are really about the cost of living, about people's quality of life, which they have seen slowly deteriorate under Conservative rule for the last 14 years, especially post-pandemic. The economy has not really recovered to levels that people would have wanted. And I think people vote on issues that touch them, and those that you've outlined, I think, is the basket of things people are going to make a decision about tonight.
Let's say with immigration, which you cited, I mean, just now, I mean, the Conservatives have repeatedly pledged to crack down on people arriving in the UK through irregular means, such as the English Channel from France, on small boats and so on. One would have thought then that's one issue that would get more people, especially the categories we've mentioned, closer to them and want to vote for them.
Well, you've also got to remember that Nigel Farage has formed a new party, the Reform Party, to the right of the Conservatives, and he may be taking some of their votes on that score because he's a very staunch opponent of immigration. Of course, the Conservative Party has had this scheme to deport migrants from the UK to Rwanda, which has not yet been put into effect. Well, there have been a few, but they haven't deported people from Britain, and it's not going to happen in the next few weeks, depending on, obviously, I think if Labour wins, that policy is probably going to be scrapped. But it's you know, people worry about migration. They worry about these being overrun and their jobs being taken away and so forth. It was an issue in South Africa, and many populist parties also played on that issue. But I don't think the Tories being tough on migrants has really stopped people getting on those boats and crossing the English Channel. There just are hundreds and hundreds that have been desperate to leave their circumstances, many from the Middle East, many from Africa, and seeking a better life in England. And that worries the English, the British, that their society is going to change massively with uncontrolled migration.
Well, what's interesting about it is that while Sunak's government, wanted to deport undocumented people to Rwanda, the Labour Party, on the other hand, said the Rwanda plan will be scrapped.
Yeah, so it is. This is a bit of bucking the trend as to what's happened in Europe. We saw in the European Party elections. We've seen in places like the Netherlands and France how right-wing parties have been gaining ground. But I think the dissatisfaction with the economy and the stewardship of the Conservative Party is so great in the UK that I think they're just going to be swept out of power.
I want to end this conversation or something by bringing it a bit closer to home. I mean, South Africa has enjoyed fairly good relations with the United Kingdom. Does it matter who wins? In other words, will it change anything with regard to how the United Kingdom relates to South Africa, but generally Africa?
Look, I think, as you put it, we've had good relations with the UK for many, many years. And it doesn't really matter for us who's in number 10 Downing Street ruling over Britain. I think the bilateral relations are strong. There's so many connections between South Africa and the UK, whether it's cultural, historical, economic, political, and so forth. I think the ANC has generally been closer to Labour governments or to Labour parties than to Conservative parties. Of course, the ANC is not governing South Africa on its own. We have our government of national unity, but I don't expect there to be any major change, even if the Conservatives somehow squeak a win, which looks unlikely, or much more likely that Keir Starmer is the next prime minister, becomes the next prime minister of Britain.
Let me stretch it a bit and ask you about the United States of America, because that's where we're going. I mean, that's the story we're doing next. I mean, this week we heard that President Biden called President Ramaphosa, congratulating them, irrespective of who wins, whether it's Biden or Donald Trump, as things look like they're going that way, certainly from what has been said, I mean, so far. United States of America, South Africa relations, and I'm asking the same question I asked you about the UK.
I think those have been a bit more controversial and a bit more prickly. Certainly, South Africa's initial stance on the war between Russia and Ukraine has disappointed America. Some of the actions that we took, for example, holding the military exercises with China and Russia on the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, has strained relations. And I also think South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice on alleged genocide charges has also aggravated the relationship with the US. We've had historically economic frictions with the US, for example, them allegedly dumping chicken into our market and so forth. So I think relations with the US have been tested. And a Trump presidency, well, Trump was not really interested in Africa. He was quite insulting of Africa, he never visited Africa. It just was not on his radar. It was not important to him. We would probably see more of the same if he occupies the White House come January next year.
Stephen, thank you very much for indulging me with your time.